Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Suzanne, and today I'm starting a new series because I've been asked various questions from people new to either wanting to start worm composting or vermicomposting, and asking various different questions about the hows, whens, whys. So I'm here right at the beginning of December. I'm in South Yorkshire in England, and our temperatures have very suddenly dropped to below freezing, and I need to get this tower sorted out. So if you've been here for a while, you'll know that I changed how I run this system. But if you're new, I'm going to go through a new series and explain some of the things that I've been doing, and basically going through some of the myths that I've found out along the way, because I didn't start this worm composting in these small confined spaces. I actually came to this from running huge muck heaps where at our capacity with horses we ran 17 horses. That produces a lot of manure. So when I was researching how to run these small bins, I took what I learned at face value, and in the time that I've been doing this, I've learned that actually some of what I found out isn't true. Now please excuse me clearing my throat, or the editing maybe being a bit choppy along this, because I'm going to be filming this all in one go and splitting it into a series of different episodes. But I've had a chest infection from having had flu, and I'm still suffering with some of the symptoms of that, so please bear with me. I do appreciate those of you that do stick with me on this. Anyway, the first episode in this series is, when do I know that my castings are ready to harvest? And the reason I'm starting with that one is because that's what I've got to do first in this tower. Now, this is a Worm City wormery, and if you don't know how to set one of these up or what it is, then I will link that in the description below. And this is what I've been running here as my top tray. Next to it is the feeding tray that I've had underneath. I've been running 2 feeding trays. I'm going to have to move you and hope that I can set all this back. Over here in the corner, I've had an inoculating tray, a tip that I picked up from Patrick at Vermicompost Learn by Doing, which is totally different to what I've now started running. Underneath is the sump, which if you run your composting system outside and you get a lot of fluid and water running through your system, or condensation, that's where all your fluid will run to. But whilst I get a lot of humidity in here, which has caused me horrendous problems this year, I don't get huge amounts of fluid run through my system, so I'm actually okay. But Patrick's inoculating tray is the thing that actually collects all my excess fluid rather than it going into the sump. The worms actually go down there to breed. So back to knowing when to harvest castings. Now, the thing you have to ask yourself first is, why do you actually want to harvest them? Because you could just leave them until the whole tray is ready, which is what I've got here, both in this tray and now over here, because I've not been able to get into this system for a while due to me being ill. So my worms, I've got a lot of worms in this system now, and with it being warm and humid, my worms actually went nuts in here, and I use a pre-composted bedding. So they did seriously well. Now, this is not a dead worm, by the way. This is a sprout that came off of an avocado pit. So please don't worry about that. It's not a dead worm. It's actually just broken off. We'll probably find the avocado pit later on in there. So I'm just going to take that out. So what I find is this has been the top tray. It's had no weight on it. Okay, this is the best tray for harvesting. Now, ordinarily, what would have happened is I'd have harvested this tray first, and then the second tray would have replaced this one. But because I've not been in here a while, the other tray has become quite compacted, because the weight of this one has pushed it down, so it needs fluffing up. Seriously, the worms don't care. It's like being in the soil for them. They have no issues with that at all. Oh, here we go, look. This is the other half of that avocado pit, and you can see that's the other half of it sprouting. So we'll set that aside for it to go back in. So this is how you know when you can harvest. The worms will generally put the best of the castings on top, and you can just scrape those off. So when you run a system like this, the worms will put castings on the top that you can just take off in a lovely pile like that. But if you've got a system that's outside, it also depends where you feed. I feed in channels that go across, and so you need to check where you're feeding. If you feed in a circle in the middle, you might find that most of your best castings are around the edge. So you need to check what's going on in the system first. Now, all of this, you can see, is really wonderful, crumbly castings. Now, this tray is sat on a 42-litre bucket. So, if my worms go down, they'll just end up in the bucket underneath. They're not sat on a floor or anything like that. It's fine if they go down. And that's a great way to harvest them, as the castings as well, is with a light. So here is one of my great worms. Now, they're not very wriggly at the moment because it is so cold here, so they're quite dormant at the moment. Now, that's the other thing. This is going to be the deciding factor as well as to how quickly you'll get castings, is on your weather, the type of bedding you use, and what you're feeding them. Now, I can feel that these castings are cold, and so my worms are going to go dormant now, and this is another reason why I want to get this tower sorted out, because my poor little worms are not going to do that much for the next, at least 4 to 5 months. The winters here in the UK are long, cold, drawn out, and quite miserable. Now, like I've just said, mine are inside, but it's currently 0 degrees in here, and overnight it can drop down to 6 degrees. So, you know, these poor little worms are not going to do much at all. They're just going to tick over, and so I need to give them the best environment to do that. Ordinarily, I'd have already had all this sorted out. So, you know, it's not ideal to have it. The reason that I also couldn't do this earlier is because I mentioned the humidity. Now, depending on where you live, you might have really great conditions, but we had quite a warm but very, very humid long period of time, and so that's a blessing and a curse with worm castings, because these will literally absorb the moisture out of the air. Now these are quite crumbly at the moment because they've dried out, but they were really boggy, and that actually caused me a problem in the tower, because the more acidic these get, the more that you'll get pests in here, and I've actually got some in the other tray. So I've got some potworms in there. The potworms and mites. Sorry, my brain did not want to pick that word up. Composting mites. They're just part of your system. They're not a huge problem in small numbers, but you know, in large quantities, they are an indicator that there's something wrong. And so when your castings and your system become over wet, then if you've got a huge bloom, that's a sign that the acidity is wrong. And so the little white flakes that you might be able to see in here, that's eggshell, because what I did was I put extra in here for the worms and everything, and to reduce down the acidity that was in here. And I also put some lime in here just to bring down the acidity. And that helps to get rid of the potworms and things, because you know they don't like a more alkaline place to live. But I also did something else, so I'll show you what else I did. So my mum, she doesn't like worms much. My mum is like with worms the way I am with spiders. We appreciate the job they do, but they squick us out a little bit. But even so, my mum saves me all the insides of the loo rolls, and I save mine. Now normally I'd shred these along with all the rest of my cardboard, but because I knew I'd got a problem in here and I knew I was coming into the winter, I started leaving them whole, and then the outside of the tissue on them, and creating little caves for the worms. But also, you see, these will then absorb all the moisture and excess out of there, but it also gives a place for your worms to go and hide, because the one thing worms like to do is congregate together, and it just gives them a place to be. So you can place these and also near their food if you want to. But if you're feeding in a pile and your tower or your bin is already acidic, you've got to remember that that heating process and everything else that's going on is not actually going to help. It's quite beneficial to maybe, if you can, get another box and take your worms out and put them somewhere else if you can. And that's why I like running these towers, because when I'm well enough to do it, it means that I can get all this out. And so one thing that I do as well is this. I have this bucket, and so in here I'm able to transfer my castings, because the one thing that you can't do when your castings are over wet is get all of the worms and the cocoons out. But you can put them into another open tub, allow them to dry out slightly, and then use this as a grow out bin as well. And so now you can see that these are lovely and crumbly, and that's now got young worms in there. And again, you can see hopefully how much of the eggshell is already in there as well. I grind it up, I use it to feed the worms, but also it just reduces that acidity that's in there. And so now I've got a great deal of castings ready to store for next year when I start the 2024. I mean, this is still just a little bit too damp. But every time I turn it and bring it to the surface, you can see that I'm breaking it up and it'll dry out a bit. So that's what I do with that. Now, like I said, it's totally up to you. Some people like to take their castings when they're about 80% done. And even if it has got some of the bedding in it, it doesn't really matter. You know, if you want to do a drench for your garden, you can use something like this. These are designed to put your delicates in for washing, and they've got a good zip on them. And so you can just put some in here, dunk it in water, and create a drench for the garden, and then just tip out the contents either onto the top of your soil like compost, or you put it back even, you know, depending what you've put in the water with it. But if you've put nothing but water in there, you can put this straight back into your tower to finish off, or put it onto a compost heap or whatever. You can do anything you like with it. So, you know, if you're taking it early just to use whatever castings are in it, it doesn't really matter. It's up to you really when you want to take them. But if you're using bedding with a lot of carbon in it, you've got to understand that if you put that straight in the garden, that carbon is going to leach out the nitrogen that's in the ground whilst it still decomposes. So all I'm going to do with this is get the worms out of here, reset these trays, and put all of these castings together. And so the next episode in this is going to be about how do you store your castings for long term. Because obviously I'm now in winter, I'm doing absolutely no gardening at all. I don't need these until 2024. And so how am I going to store these and keep these castings viable? Well, I'll show you in the next episode. So I hope you'll stick with me. I hope you'll come back. I hope you found this useful. And if you have, please like, subscribe and share, because it helps the algorithms. And I hope to see you next time. Bye for now.